I thank the representative of the Russian Federation and give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this meeting is a timely one. It gives us and a number of other countries the opportunity to inform the Council of the terrorist attacks launched by armed terrorist groups from Idlib against neighboring cities and towns in the suburbs of Aleppo, northern Hama, and northern Latakia. The most recent attack was the massacre committed by these groups 2 days ago in the village of Wadihi in the south of Aleppo. The crime led to the death of 12 civilians and the injury of more than 16 while celebrating a wedding in the village. The normal life of these villagers became a nightmare as missiles started falling, launched by the Nusra Front, supported by the Erdogan regime. The bodies of the dead and the injured were scattered across the village, and most of them were children and women. The missiles have also resulted in great damage to the houses and public and private property, including the health center and the mosque. This barbaric crime is one of many committed by the terrorist groups led by the Hayat Tahrir Sham terrorist group, or in other words, the Nusra Front, the group designated by the Security Council as a branch of Al-Qaeda in Syria. These crimes must be unequivocally condemned by the Security Council. Mr. President, I would like to provide you with a few examples of the crimes that led to the death and injury of hundreds of civilians, innocent civilians, including women and children. And I'm talking about civilian victims, without referring to the victims in our army. These crimes include 1. The city of Skalbiye, the town of Ain Krum, and the town of Belhassin were targeted on the 25th of May by dozens of missiles. The city of Salhab and Skalbiye were targeted on the 26th of May by 30 missiles. The town of Kamahne was targeted on the 29th and on the 31st of May with a number of missiles and rockets. The Kalat al-Madig, Karkat, and Shatha in North Hama and northwestern Hama were targeted by a number of missiles and rockets. The city of Jable was targeted by a number of rockets, as well as the city of Mharde, repeatedly, most recently earlier today. The sites of and the positions of the Syrian Arab Army and the positions of our Russian allies, especially the Hmeimim airport, were also targeted with missiles and explosive drones. Since a number of members asked questions, I would like to ask a question. Where do these terrorist groups get their weapons from? Do they get them from the air by balloons, from another planet, or from members on this council and outside the council? Who provides these terrorists with missiles, tanks, rockets, mines? Where do they get their arsenal? Where do these terrorists come from? 100,000 foreign terrorists entered Syria from Turkey. We have repeated that on the Council. And the Council committee confirmed that 101 member states have their citizens operating as foreign terrorist fighters in Syria. Mr. President, the statements we heard today show that there is a shared understanding that there is a problem that needs to be addressed in Idlib. This is what we got from your statements. I'm talking about the city of Idlib in Syria, not a city in Florida, not a city in the UK or in Germany. I'm talking about a city in Syria, the city of Idlib. On the 17th of May, last month, I explained to you in detail that the reason behind the problem is the Turkish regime and its allies that continue to provide all forms of support to terrorist groups. And they have reneged on their commitments under the de-escalation agreement as well as the Astana and Sochi agreements. This has allowed the Hayat Tahrir Sham terrorist group, which includes tens of thousands of foreign terrorist fighters, including more than 15,000 Europeans. It allowed the Hayat Tahrir Sham terrorist group to control almost fully the city of Idlib and adjacent areas in northwestern Syria, and to create a terrorist pocket that would blackmail the Syrian state, and to use hundreds of thousands of civilians as human shields, and to commit the most heinous of crimes against them, to spread terror, death, and destruction, and to destroy civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, schools, turning them into military sites, into detention sites, while killing anyone who would dare reject their takfiri and their pre-Islamic ideology. Some members, as well as Mr. Lowcock and Ms. De Carlo, said that there were 27 hospitals that were targeted in Idlib, and I don't know which sources they relied on for this information. I would like to tell you that Damascus, which is home to 8 million people, includes only 8 public hospitals and 9 public hospitals in the suburbs, 17 in total. Again, Damascus, the capital, which is home to 8 million people, has only 17 hospitals, public hospitals, as well as 10 private hospitals. So the total number would be less than 30 in Damascus, in the capital. Aleppo has 11 public hospitals. And let's say 10 private hospitals. Aleppo in total has 20 hospitals, which is home to 5 million people. As for Idlib, Idlib has 4 hospitals only. Idlib has 4 public hospitals only. And let's say there are 4 private hospitals, the total would be 8. How can you say that 27 hospitals were targeted in Idlib? Please tell me what sources of information you used. I would like to say on the record that the information provided was based on lies, misleading information. The sources that provided you with these information are lying. Idlib does not have 27 hospitals. As for what the UK representative said, if the white helmets are using some sort of a basement to launch attacks, then this is not a hospital. This is a makeshift unit, as they say. It is just a room in a basement that is used to launch attacks and shell civilians and the Syrian Arab army. I would also like to refer to another scandal. Eight years have passed since the sanctions or the unilateral measures were imposed. 8 years have passed. And to this day, the United States and the European Union ban the exporting of medical equipment, including MRI and CT scan, to Syria, as well as other tools used to sew up wounds in Syria. I don't understand how you can be talking about the humanitarian situation in Syria, expressing concern about the humanitarian situation in Syria, while banning the exporting of medical equipment to Syria. Shame on you. Shame on you. If I can, I would even say it's a crime. Apparently, OCHA is blind to that. Mr. Carlo is blind to that, as well as the humanitarian pen holders. The Syrian government and its allies do not target schools or hospitals. These are our schools, our hospitals. Mr. President, the implementation of international law, the Charter, and your resolutions on counterterrorism require supporting the efforts of the Syrian government and its allies to combat terrorism, to build partnership with the Syrian government as the only party concerned with ending any terrorist presence in Syria and improving the humanitarian situation. This is instead of calling for these grandstanding sessions, instead of spreading misleading information and making false accusations against my country and our allies, while blocking any legal measures that we are taking as a Syrian government to protect our citizens and to liberate them from the terrorist groups that use them as human shields. What is needed is to cease immediately any attempts to undermine the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic, and to cease any attempts to use the crisis and exploit it to serve the hidden agendas of certain countries. There is a need to put an end to selective policies and biased approaches. This is clear as certain members overlook the crimes committed by terrorist groups. They overlook the role of certain governments known to all that support terrorism. They overlook war crimes and the crimes against humanity committed by the international coalition in Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, Hajin, and Baghuz. Something that the representative of the Russian Federation mentioned, and I thank him for that. They overlook the detention by American troops of tens of thousands of Syrian civilians in the Rukban camp. And I have to say that the Rukban camp is on Syrian territory. It's a Syrian territory occupied by American troops. They occupy this territory and they support a terrorist group there known as Fasil al-Thawra. This terrorist group demands 100,000 Syrian pounds for every individual seeking to leave the camp. They ask this individual to pay this much just to leave the camp. A whole family has to pay 700,000 Syrian pounds just to leave the camp. Mr. President, in order to end the suffering of Syrians in Idlib and other parts of Syria, there is a need to, one, addressing the root causes of the suffering of the Syrians, including the policies of terrorist-sponsoring governments and the practices of terrorist organizations, as well as the crimes committed by the so-called international coalition and its militias, including the deliberate burning of crops, such as wheat and barley. Regarding the burning of agricultural crops, 2 or 3 days ago, there was an announcement in Turkey in Arabic addressed to Syrian farmers. According to the announcement, the Turkish government expressed its readiness to buy these crops using Syrian pounds. Those crops that were not burnt will be sold to Syria for ridiculous prices. And people and certain countries accuse us of making false accusations against the Turkish regime. The Turkish regime does not respect good neighborliness. If it did, it should have thought about the future, regardless of international law and regardless of any agreements we might have. The Turkish government must look towards the future. We are and we will be in this area, including in the future. The Turkish regime must not allow hundreds of thousands of foreign terrorist fighters to access Syria through its borders. It should not allow the entry of chemical weapons into Syria, chemical weapons that were brought to Aleppo and eventually to Khan al-Sheikh. A terrorist under the name of Haitham al-Qassar was working for the Turkish intelligence and helped transport these chemical weapons to Syria. I have sent you 800 official letters. I sent the Council 800 official letters, but you do not want to read them. 2. Ending the illegitimate presence of US and Turkish troops on Syrian territory and putting an end to the suffering of millions of civilians living in areas under the control of these troops. 3. Ensuring an immediate and unconditional lifting of the illegitimate unilateral coercive measures imposed on the Syrian people, which amount to an economic terrorism and a collective punishment against the Syrian people. 4. Ending the deliberate and systematic politicization of the humanitarian issue and any attempts by certain countries to use this issue in a manner inconsistent with the principles of humanitarian action. 5. Supporting the efforts of the Syrian state to ensure reconstruction in areas controlled by terrorist groups. This is something that is rejected by France, the US, and other countries. These countries stand against the reconstruction of areas destroyed by terrorism in Syria, and it is up to you to interpret that however you want. Supporting the efforts of the Syrian state to facilitate the return of Syrian refugees in safety and dignity, and channeling any donor pledges to that end. In closing, Mr. President, the Council has adopted more than 46 resolutions on counterterrorism. 46 resolutions on counterterrorism. It has been 9 years since the terrorist war was first launched against my country, Syria. It has now become clear the dimensions of this war and the role played by certain governments to fuel the war and to prolong it. However, some members inside and outside the Council continue to invest in terrorism as a partner against the Syrian state instead of building a partnership with the Syrian state against terrorism. And it is up to you to interpret that however you may. I would like to stress once again that the Syrian government will not succumb to the terrorist war imposed on it. We will not allow for the lives of our civilians and citizens to be endangered. We will continue to exercise our sovereign and constitutional right and implement the Charter and international law to defend our land, our citizens, and to combat terrorism and end the illegitimate foreign presence on the territories of the Syrian Arab Republic. The government of my country is committed at the same time to a political solution that would allow Syrians by themselves to determine their future through an intra-Syrian dialogue, a Syrian-led dialogue without any foreign interference, in a manner that would ensure the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Syria. Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the representative of